Human beings are people of movement. We express ourselves through the movements we do. 40 weeks for men. 40 weeks for men. 40 weeks for men. So we are in week 38 of the development of the baby, of gestation. So as we do around here, we're going to educate about that and try and learn together. Thinking about the baby at week 38. We're also going to witness my experience, talk about society at large, and call listeners to action. Let's get into it. Let's start off by learning together to start with. So, thinking about what's happening at week 38 of development of the baby, there's a lot of things happening as the baby develops at this point. But there's a couple of things that I want to highlight. So at this point, the majority of pregnancies, the majority of people, there is a rhythm to how the baby is moving in the mother's tummy, in the womb. So there's periods of activity, periods of rest, periods of activity, periods of rest, periods of activity, periods of rest. And this is really important because as we concentrate on this, when those things change, we can be more aware that something may be up. So it's really important to get used to the periods of activity and the periods of rest, the rhythms of the baby's movements. And yes, obviously we're going to talk about that more, but also something to highlight as well at this point is that in the mother's tummy, the baby developing in there is practicing its facial expressions. So things like smiles and frowns. Now, I don't think we really understand why this happens. Because as you'll know, you'll find out listeners, when your baby is born, it seems like these smiles and frowns and facial expressions are actually not attributed to any sort of bodily function. They seem quite random. But I postulate, my theory is, a lot of human communication is actually much more than just verbal communication, much more than words and speaking. But actually, there's a lot of non-verbal communication that's going on. And I think the baby's practicing how to move those muscles. But the only thing I don't understand, and I'm hoping that as I study and think about it more, I get more of an understanding. But it seems like the baby, if you look in there, different scanning images and different ways to look in the womb, if you look in there, the baby's smiling and frowning. And like, you think to yourself, how did you learn the importance of a smile? Especially when you're surrounded by what we know as the amniotic fluid. And really, there's no example of smiles and frowns. But I guess it's just practicing moving the muscles in its face. And that causes facial expression. Yeah, I don't really understand it. But it's quite interesting how human beings can communicate in that way. And at this point, at week 38, we're really thinking about the importance of learning these facial expressions. The baby's doing that. It's learning these facial expressions. It's in the rhythm of activity and rest. Now it's time to witness my experience. So witnessing to my experience, when my babies were in mommy's tummy growing in there, there was a lot of differences in activity and rest for me, for those three. But one thing that was quite similar, I don't wonder what you listeners think. One thing that was quite similar that I noticed was it seemed for me that babies were more active in the room, so moving around more at night time. But when my wife was trying to have rest, that's when they wouldn't move around more. Now, I know this is different depending on where you are in the world, because obviously I'm in the UK, so my time zone is GMT. But if you were in a place like Australia, your time zone is very different to mine. So when it's nighttime for me, it would be daytime for you. So when my babies were moving around at night in Australia, it was daytime, so it was perfect. But it seemed to me that my babies were moving around more, or they were more active at nighttime when my wife was trying to rest, especially in the third trimester in the home stretch, during the third part of the pregnancy. So I wonder if that was the same for you, but it seemed like along all 3 pregnancies, that's how it was for me. Now it's time to talk about society at large. So around here we go back to the Bible. So I think a really good verse for us to read today is Mark chapter 6, verse 31. So I'll go ahead and read that from the English Standard Version. I just found it here. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat." See, I think there are things to learn about here from this verse in Mark chapter 6, verse 31. So, the context here, let me give the context. So the context here is that Jesus has encouraged his followers, or sent out his followers to sort of go and do some amazing things. So they're doing amazing things. They're healing the sick. They're going out to different places and being very bold in what they're doing. The reason I think this, the reason I feel led to read this and think about this together is because if we think about pregnancy, it's an amazing thing. Like, even just being supportive of a partner who's pregnant, or even if you have young children or older children, it's an amazing thing to see them grow and to be in the whole process to get to week 38 of gestational development. It's an amazing thing. But in the amazingness of Jesus' followers, his advice to them is, come away by yourselves and let's rest a while. Let's think and let's rest a while. And I think there's something for us to learn here. This idea of rhythm, we think about it this week. Activity and rest, doing both in a rhythmic way, is actually something that is very wise to do, something that's very godly. And I want to encourage the listeners that actually coming away and resting a while is something that we encourage to do in the Bible, but also something that we can look at the baby at week 38 of gestation is doing his rhythm, is active and is resting, but it's also practicing the facial expressions. And we can look at this baby and be like, oh, it is good to rest. It is good sometimes to come away to a desolate place and rest a while. Call to action for the listeners this week is, I'm going to do it like Jesus did it. Come away by yourselves to a desolate place. So my question to you listeners is, what is your desolate place? Where can you come away by yourselves? So I know for some people, it might be the home office. For some people, it might be the car. For some people, it might be the train. For some people, it might be a plane or a flight. But it's important once in a while to build in this thing of coming away by yourselves and resting a while. I think it's really important to be able to reflect, especially when our partners are pregnant. So yeah, that's the call to action this week. Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while.